Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's joining us today. My name is Stuart Neal. I'm the Director of Strategy and Communications at the International Chamber of Shipping, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this special briefing that we've put together on the short-term measures from the IMO on the GHG, which come into implementation on the 1st of January next year. So I think there's a lot of interest in what's coming down the line for our industry and how we're able to adapt and work with these measures to reduce our carbon emissions as part of a decarbonisation journey. Just to let everyone know that we are recording this and it will be made available to attendees after the meeting, and we encourage you to participate. There's a chat function, so if you've got any questions, you want to ask the panel some more detailed questions, please do fill that in. We'll be able to, hopefully, get to as many as we can. And I've got a great panel to help navigate through this discussion today. First of all, we have Edwin Pang. Edwin is the founder and principal consultant at Acela Consultants, who provides guidance to a number of companies on all matters related to shipping. So welcome, Edwin. And we have from the Dalian Maritime University, Professor Shuang Zhang, speaking to us now from Beijing, I think, and welcome to you. And finally, my colleague, Chris Waddington, who's our technical director here at the International Chamber of Shipping and is deeply involved in working with the IMO and these regulations. So good morning, Chris. So without further ado, I'm not the real expert. We have great experts here. So let me hand over first of all to Chris, who can take you through the regulatory side of where these regulations are coming from, and then Edwin's going to talk about the operational implications for that. So let me hand over to Chris. Chris, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. And good day to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Next slide. Here we are. Okay, so within our webinar today, I'll outline the regulatory requirements relating to IMO's short-term measures. Edwin of Acela will then discuss the practical measures that can be adopted to ensure compliance. And finally, Professor Zhang of Dalian University will join Edwin and myself for the question and answer session at the end. Next slide, please. So by way of introduction, let's consider IMO's initial greenhouse gas strategy. This was adopted in 2018, and the strategy's vision calls for greenhouse gas emissions from international shipping to be phased out as soon as possible. Levels of ambition are defined with regard to carbon intensity, and the strategy calls for annual greenhouse gas emissions from shipping to reduce by at least 50% by 2050. Measures to meet these targets are categorized as short, mid, and long-term. The short-term measures are now in place, and the medium and long-term measures remain under development. IMO is currently reviewing its strategy, and this process is due to complete within the first half of 2023. Many member states are calling for the complete phase-out of most greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and hence the level of ambition within our IMO strategy may change. Next slide, please, Fiona. Okay. The short-term measures are intended to improve the fuel efficiency of ships and to reduce the carbon intensity of all ships by at least 40% by 2030 as compared to 2008. Existing short-term measures include the Ship Energy Efficiency Management Plan, or SEMP, the Energy Efficiency Design Index for new ships, EEDI, and the Data Collection System, DCS. This group of measures was completed in June 2021 when IMO's Marine Environment Protection Committee adopted MARPOL amendments requiring compliance with the SEMP Part 3, the Energy Efficiency Existing Ship Index, EEXI, and the Carbon Intensity Indicator, CII. Next slide, please, Fiona. Let's look in a bit more detail now at the existing short-term measures. First introduced in January 2013, the EEDI is a design index applicable to new vessels of 400 gross tons and above. Vessels need to meet the reference level for their ship type, which is tightened every 5 years. The question of EEDI Phase 4 will again arise at December's MEPC 79 meeting. However, the outcome of the preceding correspondence group was inconclusive, and hence our expectation is that little short-term progress can be made with regard to EEDI Phase 4. In its simplified form, EEDI amounts to the ship's CO2 emissions divided by capacity and reference speed. Next slide, please. The Ship Energy Efficiency Management Plan, SEMP, is a ship-specific operational measure and has been mandatory for all ships of 400 gross tons and above from 1st of January 2013. Annual reporting to IMO's data collection system has been mandatory for all ships over 5,000 gross tons from 1st of January 2019. The reported data includes fuel consumption, distance travelled, and time at sea. Next slide, please. Let's now look at the new short-term measures that were adopted as MARPOL Annex 6 amendments in June 2021. Firstly, the new SEMP Part 3 must detail the ship's operational carbon intensity plan and contain the required annual operational CII values for the ship up to 2025. And it will be subject to external verifications and annual audits. On satisfactory assessment by the administration or recognised organisation, the confirmation of compliance, or COC, is issued. Next slide, please, Fiona. The SEMP Part 3 must provide a methodology for continuous improvement of the ship's energy efficiency. For ships of 5,000 gross tons and above, the verified copy, together with a certificate of compliance, must be on board on or before 31st of December 2022. And of course, this is a very tight deadline, and indeed, One Class Society has recently advised that SEMP Part 3 plans submitted after 15th of November are not guaranteed to have verification completed by 1st of January 2023. The SEMP Part 3 is to be updated every 3 years, or when voluntary modifications are made to a ship, or when a CII corrective action plan is required. Next slide, please, Fiona. EEXI. EEXI is a design index that's very similar to EEDI, the design index for new ships. It's a one-off calculation that applies to existing ships above 400 gross tons from the first annual intermediate or renewal IAPP survey after the 1st of January 2023. And this may be a tight deadline, but of course, depending on the exact timing of the IAPP survey. Ships above minimum size thresholds have EEXI targets they must reach, and the size thresholds vary according to vessel type. And the targets are closely aligned to current EEDI new build requirements. The EEXI technical file, including the EEXI calculations, must be verified and approved by the recognised organisation or flag administration. Following their IAPP survey, ships must have on board their verified EEXI technical file and their International Energy Efficiency Certificate, known as the IEEC. It's expected that most ship owners will achieve compliance by installing overrideable engine or shaft power limitation. However, please note that several of our members, ICS members, have been reporting the appearance of bottlenecks in type approval and supply of this equipment. Hence, early consideration of compliance measures by ship owners is recommended. The carbon intensity indicator now, CII, is an operational measure that applies to new and existing ships above 5,000 gross tons and will take effect from 1st of January 2023. Vessels will annually be allocated a banded rating from A to E. Those placed in Band D for 3 consecutive years or Band E for 1 year will be required to submit a corrective action plan. Bandings will be progressively reduced by 2% per year through to 2026, and the reductions beyond 2026 are yet to be decided by IMO. And the system includes a range of correction factors and voyage adjustments, which are currently termed interim. Next slide, please. Considering now the CII metrics, the CII system uses 2 metrics known as the annual efficiency ratio, or AER, and the capacity gross ton distance, or CG-DIST. And these use maximum deadweights and gross tonnage as proxies for cargo capacity. Hence, the calculation of attained CII does not use the actual cargo carried, and this is an often criticized feature of the system and may give a perverse incentive to maximize ballast voyages. Next slide, please, Fiona. The CII guidelines also provide an option for ship owners to voluntarily report the alternative or trial CII metrics known as EEOI, EEPI, CV-DIST, and CI-DIST. IMO will include analysis of the received trial metrics data within their overall review of the CII system, and this may lead to the trial metrics being adopted for certain ship types. ICS is actively encouraging ship owners to take up this option, as it represents the only feasible pathway to optimize the range of adopted CII metrics. Next slide, please, Fiona. Now just a brief slide on the correction factors and voyage adjustments for the CII system. The CII guidelines also provide a range of correction factors and voyage adjustments that may be applied to the CII calculation. And these may be categorized as corrections for tankers undertaking ship-to-ship transfer of cargo, tankers engaged in shuttle tanker operations, fuel consumed for production of electrical power for specific purposes, boiler fuel consumption, other related fuel consumption, for example, for tanker cargo pumps, EEDI and EEXI correction factors that have already been included with a vessel's EEDI or EEXI technical file, and ship sailing in ice or encountering a scenario that may endanger safe navigation. And during the CII experience building period, industry associations will continue to advocate at IMO for a wider range of correction factors that more adequately reflects the complex array of ship types and modes and regions of operation. Next slide, please. Let's now look at the review of the EEXI and CII systems that IMO must carry out. The MARPOL Annex 6 amendments require MEPC to complete reviews of the EEXI and CII systems by 1st of January 2026. For EEXI, a review shall be completed to assess the effectiveness of the regulation, taking into account any guidelines developed by the organisation. For CII, the review will assess the effectiveness of the regulation in reducing the carbon intensity of international shipping, the need for reinforced corrective actions or other means of remedy, including possible additional EEXI requirements, the need for enhancement of the enforcement mechanism, the need for enhancement of the data collection system, and the revision of the Z factor and CIIR values, that is the percentage reductions we mentioned earlier. Prior to the completion of the review, CII is subject to soft enforcement, whereby vessels rated D for 3 consecutive years or E for 1 year must produce and adhere to a corrective action plan. Next slide, please. So let's now summarize the forthcoming key compliance deadlines. On or before 31st of December 2022, the verified SEMP Part 3, together with the Certificate of Compliance, the COC, must be on board the vessel. On 1st of January 2023, data collection for the first annual CII reporting period is initiated. At the first annual intermediate or renewal IAPP survey after 1st of January 2023, verification of the EEXI must be completed and the International Energy Efficiency Certificate, the IEC, must be on board together with a verified EEXI technical file. 30th of November 2023 is the deadline for completion of the SEMP company audits. And by 31st of March 2024, the attained CII for the first annual reporting period must be submitted to the administration or RO. Upon satisfactory completion of the verification, a statement of compliance is issued. Next slide, please. Thank you. And finally, we'd just like to say a brief word for ICS's recently published, or I should say very soon to be published, regulatory guide. Although IMO's long-term aim is to summarize the short-term measures within a carbon intensity code, this is unlikely to be available for several years. And in the meantime, ICS's new regulatory guide provides clarity to ship owners and operators by referencing all relevant IMO documents, providing clear interpretations and suggesting practical means to achieve compliance. And copies will be available from our website very soon. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentations, and I'll now hand back to Stuart. Over to you, Stuart.
Thank you very much, Chris, and as very comprehensive as ever. And there's an awful lot to unpack in the regulations that you've taken through. So I think to try and help us understand the operational practicalities of that, we've asked Edwin to just try and move that on from the regulatory requirements to what that really means. So Edwin, may I hand over to you, please?
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Chris, for that great introduction to the regulatory landscape. As Stuart says, I'm going to talk a little bit about practical compliance for EEXI and CII. First up, the rough agenda we'll go through today. What's a saving claim look like, and when is 5% not 5%? And then we'll go through EEXI, power limitation, and some other compliance methods, as well as a whole range of issues surrounding CII. Right, savings claims. Many of you have probably seen some of these when you've been looking for solutions for your ships. So a typical savings claim would be X is an energy saving device attached to the propeller of a vessel. It breaks up the hub vortex, etc., and results in energy savings of 3 to 5%. And something else will do 3%, and you have sort of infographics like this that sort of claim that various things that you do will save certain percentages of stuff. Now, so here's the anatomy of a savings claim. Product XYZ, state-of-the-art energy savings solution that results in energy savings of 5%. But what is that 5%? Well, usually 5% is 5% of propulsion consumption only. It's usually at one specific speed, draft, and trim. And it might actually be a best case saving, and estimated and calculated rather than measured. And here is a sort of trace of lots of different points that's data collected from a vessel. And as you can see, our standard speed power curves are here, and we'll probably look at a savings at one point. But the ship actually operates in an incredibly large envelope where you have a huge range of different speeds, huge range of different shaft powers, and of course not seen in this different drafts, different trims, and so on. So that 5% is a real simplification of what you're actually going to get. And the other surprise is that regulations that have a baseline, these percentages work slightly differently. So we always think in terms of a 5% saving relative to the ship, but not against the baseline, which is a different number. But all our reduction rates for EEXI and CII are compared to the baseline. So as your attained EEXI or your attained CII gets smaller, that percentage is against a smaller number and not the baseline. So that 5% of your ship is not 5% relative to the baseline. So in the right-hand side here, we have this same 5% idea. 5% improvement in EEXI of the ship only results in a 3.5% improvement relative to the baseline because it started off at 25% better than the baseline. So this is something to bear in mind. What what we compare our percentages against is very important. So manufacturer might claim something, you've got to work it out for yourself, what you think that's actually going to result in for your ship, for your operational profile, and taking into account these mechanisms with baselines. Here's the equation we all love to see for EEXI. It's the same for EDI. We've color coded it, and apologies if you can't see the colors very well. But broadly speaking, the EEXI is made up of a main engine component, an auxiliary engine component, something to do with shaft motors, and then a couple of energy efficient technology terms, one for electrical, one for mechanical. There's a bunch of correction factors, and in the denominator, we have capacity, the reference speed, and this bit we've kind of termed transport work. So really significantly simplified, it's something like this. 75% of MCR multiplied by a carbon factor and the specific fuel consumption of the main engine, and similar thing for the auxiliary engine. Now, 5%, when we talk about this 5%, where does this 5% energy saving technology fit in the EDI and EEXI formula? Now, most people obviously would think, of course, it's going to go here. But if you think about this, if you install an energy saving device, you don't reduce the engine power, you reduce, you would actually, if the engine power stays the same, because you haven't actually changed the MCR value, what's actually going to happen is that your speed's going to increase. Now, this is very, this is sort of slightly unexpected because we mostly would say, well, of course, if I install an energy saving device, I reduce the amount of power that I need at a certain speed. But the EEXI formula and the EDI, for that fact, doesn't work that way. In order to reduce the power, you've got to limit the power. So adding a hydrodynamic device actually increases your speed. And there's an interesting consequence about this. The relationship between speed and power is cubic. So if something technically could reduce the power by 5% to achieve the same speed, in the EEXI formula, when you turn that back into speed only increases about 1.7%, which means that actually your technology that was going to save you 5% in an EEXI context will save you much less just because of how the formula works. In order to get the full effect, you've actually got to separately reduce or limit your engine power. And this is, of course, why many of you have probably gone for limiting engine power as the default option. Just a note, this doesn't apply to innovative technology like air lubrication or wind assist, because there's a separate term for it, which actually deducts the power. So you can see this up here in the numerator. So power limitation, this is what many of you are probably looking at in terms of compliance for EEXI. The original installed power of this vessel is 8,600 kilowatts, and standard EDI or EEXI calculation methodology, PME is 75% of MCR. So that's installed, that's the calculation point. And then your VREF is sort of down here. Now, if you had to limit this, now this is down to about 7 megawatts. PME limited is no longer calculated at 75% of the limited value, but 83%. And so you end up, instead of being able to, instead of having all of this power reserve, being able to operate all the way up here, you're limited in normal circumstances to operate under the gray line. But the calculation point is the green, is this green line here at this point. So you can see the speed is much slower. You can, however, still operate all the way up to the MCR limit in normal everyday operation. Now, if you want to use this power reserve, and you would have to have installed an overridable engine power limitation, meaning in certain conditions, when the vessel is in danger, where there's particularly adverse weather, you can unlimit you can restore the power to the maximum. But after you've done that, you've got to bring the limit back, and depending on the type of engine you have, you may have to seal it, and you certainly have to record all this in an operations manual. You have to log all this information. However, some of you may have looked at doing non-overridable power limitations, and if you do that, then PME is only 75%. It still remains 75% of MCR and not 83%. Now, some words about this power limitation, and as just almost repeating what I said earlier, since hydrodynamic energy saving devices require corresponding power limitation, the likelihood is most of you will go for power limitation alone for the purposes of EEXI compliance. Why spend more money than you actually need to? In many cases, though not all of them, current operational and eco speeds are not affected by the power limitation, though you will find some where this does make a difference, particularly the older ships. And it may also have impacts on weather margins, catch-up speeds, and the performance when the vessel is heavily fouled. Lately, and Chris has also mentioned this, there are reports of significant delays in the supply chain affecting availability and lead times of overrideable power limitations. We've also, however, seen in the market the available types of power limitations have proliferated. And so the options available are now also increasing to beyond the types we'd originally foreseen when the regulation and when the guidance was written. Now, although power limitation is the main, probably the main game in town for EEXI, there are obviously other EEXI compliance methods, and a cursory glance at the news will probably tell you that some of the things that are sort of happening. There is a dedicated term, as I said, for mechanical energy efficient technology, and this encompasses air lubrication, and wind assistance and propulsion. And for these technologies, there is no need to additionally impose a power limitation since power is deducted in the equation. But of course, the previously mentioned modifications to savings, such as take care of what's going on at the baseline, that all still applies. That's EEXI. CII. So we talked about earlier on when we think about savings, we often think about propulsion. CII is the measure that really is going to force everyone to think in terms of all fuel consumption and no longer just propulsion consumption. And although it's probably apparent to many of you, sometimes it bears repeating. Ships are not underway all the time. They're not a perpetual motion machine, and they spend significant amounts of time in port, waiting, loading, discharging, maneuvering, ballasting. And when you're doing that, your propulsion savings don't count. And so all the fuel consumption associated with electrical service and hotel loads are taken into account, as well as oil consumption. And many of you know some ships have substantial cargo-related consumption, reefers, cargo heating, cargo pumps, and as before, wide range of speeds, drafts, trims, and weather conditions. Therefore, your claimed savings from any bit of kit will be much greater than the actual CII improvement you're going to see on a yearly basis, except in the case of alternative fuels. So in CII, operational interventions count a lot more than technology, than stuff you might want to buy. So good biofouling management, that's anti-fouling selection, hull and propeller cleaning, minimization of waiting idle time, and speed optimization, these potentially have double-digit percentage impacts on CII. This chart here on the right is from a recent IMO BIMCO publication looking at what you might want to do with fouling. And this is a different bunch of studies that have been done where they looked at varying levels or amounts of biofouling and the actual impact on the y-axis in terms of increase of GHG emissions. And it's very, very apparent here that it doesn't really take a lot of fouling for you to lose quite a lot of performance and lose quite a lot of efficiency. And so keeping your hull clean or in good condition is absolutely imperative and relatively inexpensive. And again, along the theme of operational profile optimization, you want to look at generator optimization. Don't run 2 or 3 generators at the low load. If you can, try to sort of run 1 generator at the optimum SFOC point. There's weather routing, and there's also trim optimization, and these all probably give you sort of favorable cost benefit. And I'm sure many of you have already been looking at this. Something that the SEMP really encourages you to do, but which bears repeating, you need to plan and forecast operations, both short and long term. So this monitoring, planning, and forecasting thing that the SEMP takes you through, it's not just a paper exercise. It's for you to implement and to track and monitor the progress of the vessel as you go on. So SEMP Part 3 sort of encourages you to look long term, so a 3-year macro review, the 3-year implementation plan, but forecasting needs to be done on a voyage basis, followed by voyage monitoring. So you can take action as and when required, almost immediately and not wait till the end of the year. And monitoring also helps you to improve your forecasting. You can do some calibration of your forecasting methodologies. And communicate with stakeholders, ports, charterers. Collaboration will well, definitely will unlock efficiencies. This CII is something that is not designed to do so. One of the effects of CII is to really break down the silos between departments in a shipping company and between shipping companies and their charterers and all the stakeholders in that chain. And it's really encouraging you to communicate about your data, communicate what you're going to do, so that collectively you can drive efficiencies. Chris mentioned correction factors. Now, correction factors help, but they're not really a long-term solution. They're here for the now, to kind of help with this level playing field while we're working our way through how CII needs to be probably reviewed and amended in the future. Because for some correction factors, the amount of correction that we'll have will reduce over time. Broadly, it will reduce by 3% per year. And so you need to, for now, you can rely on correction factors, but they're not going to be there forever. But also make sure that if you're going to use correction factors, make sure they're used correctly, because it's quite a complex set of correction factors. You may have to install meters and sensors as needed, and learn from the additional data that you collect to drive efficiency. Don't just say, okay, I've collected this data and I get correction factor and that's it. That data is valuable. A word on digitalization though. So digitalization, buzzwords, performance monitoring, AI, another buzzword, they all can help, but it's very dependent on data. And the old adage, garbage in, garbage out, counts more than ever. And big data can simply mean more garbage. And so ensuring reliable and accurate data, maintaining sensors and ensuring proper integration won't get you in the headlines. You know, this is very mundane stuff, but it's absolutely critical. And I have this cloud of data that you see here on the right, and you might be tempted to think that the wrong sensor data is this plume up here. In reality, the installed power of this vessel, installed shaft power of this vessel is 6 megawatts. So everything here and this is wrong. And that's maybe an extreme example of bad data, but you've really got to look at what you're getting in terms of data before you're able to analyze it and have some useful insights from it. Don't just assume, just because I've got some data, I've got a data feed, it's connected to something, I can see it, that's all you need, because that's not the case. And sensors are fallible at best, and you need to make sure that they're always working, because there will be lots of errors. And finally, digital insights, it's fantastic. The crew still needs to act on them. So it doesn't exist in a kind of vacuum somewhere over here. The crew still need to be connected and do something and act on what the digital insights are telling them. Lots about this operational stuff. Technology still has a part to play, of course. So address low-hanging fruit first, as I said, operational stuff. You can still then add back to technology, air lubrication, wind assist we've mentioned before, or you could go down other hydrodynamic options, some with proven track records like ducts and so on. There are also some innovative new concepts that are being tested, like the gate rudder here on the right, which is part of an EU-funded project, and there've been a few retrofits and with some sort of quite startling results. Generator consumption, because you know this for stuff that you use your generators for, will shore power make a substantial difference? Well, it depends on your operational profile. Will batteries help to optimize generator SFOC? Those are things you need to look at. Every little bit helps. Word on alternative fuels. So current CII is based on tank to wake and LNG, methanol, ammonia, etc. Well, actually, ammonia is not in there yet, but they're treated as per this carbon factors in the EEDI calculation guidelines. Now, we have some standalone LCA guidelines under discussion, and there will be some possible eventual consideration of well-to-tank emissions in some way in CII, maybe, but we haven't decided that yet, the IMO. In CII, but this will lead to differential treatment of gray, blue, green, or biomethanol. And this, the fact that we haven't quite completed these guidelines at the moment, gives rise to some uncertainty about sort of making investment decisions right now. There's no guidance on biofuels in the current DCS or CII guidelines, so nothing saying that you can or can't use them or how you should use them. But the 2021 DCS data did show that there are about 68,000 tons of biofuel use. At the moment, probably shouldn't be counted on as a compliance strategy, at least for CII, though many of you probably find that your charterers and in the logistics chain, they recognize biofuels in any other carbon accounting schemes. So you've got to weigh that up for yourself. And in the hope that perhaps we will quickly at the IMO have something, some guidance on biofuels. Okay, 3 misconceptions. Can I offset my emissions to comply with CII? No, but you may choose to do so for your charterer. Can you just pay for emissions? No, there are no monetary incentives or penalties at the moment. They're part of CII. My worst voyages are actually domestic voyages, so can I just exclude those because this is international in nature? Sorry, but if you trade internationally but just have a few domestic voyages, unfortunately, all fuel consumption and distance during the domestic voyages have to be taken into account. Right, that's the end of my presentation. I'll hand it back to Stuart.
Thank you, Edwin. So we've heard from Chris with a very detailed and comprehensive discussion around the regulatory framework that's been created at the IMO, and then Edwin's taken us through the sort of complexity of compliance and how people need to. So there's a maelstrom of information there. I'm going to ask Professor Schwang to try and make some sense of this, because obviously you've been looking closely at this, and maybe start off with. You know, we see in the media, and Chris referenced the sort of concern about perverse incentives that maybe the CIIs can create, and may end up actually increasing emissions rather than reducing them, because you either travel out of ballast or you do longer journeys because there's congestion. You know, what's your take on that? Well, how have you been looking at that, and how do you think that issue should be addressed?
Thank you, Stuart, and a very good day to all. And also thank Edwin and Chris for your very insightful presentation. So back to our question. The CII mechanism provides a valuable tool to evaluate and enhance the involvement of all stakeholders in the marine value chain in promoting low carbon shipping. It aims to guide the shipping industry as a whole to reduce its operational carbon intensity. However, when applied to individual ships, there may be a perverse incentive due to the use of AER or CGDs as the mandatory carbon intensity indicators. Because in both indicators, the capacity, DWT or GT, is taken as a proxy of actual cargoes or passengers carried on board, and only the activity that create sailing distance can be counted as transport work. Therefore, a ship carrying less cargoes and sailing on longer voyages with relatively shorter port time will obtain a better CII. The policymakers at IMO actually are aware of this problem, but since AER and CDDs are the only two carbon intensity metrics which can be supported by the IMO data collection system, there are actually no other choices. It is mainly for this very reason a D or E ship would still be allowed to serve the market as long as there is a sound SAMP in place. Besides, some other better indicators such as EEPI and EEOI have also been listed in the G1 guidelines for trial purposes. Ships are encouraged to collect additional data, as encouraged by Edwin also, for those trial indicators on voluntary basis for use in the review stage to refine the regulations. So regarding how to address the potential perverse incentive, first of all, CII is a goal-based measure. So operators are free to choose whichever method to achieve a superior CII performance. Since there will not be a hard legal punishment for D or E ship, operators will not undertake extra ballast voyages or unnecessary distance simply for a better CII rating, unless such a behavior would bring them much more benefit than the extra cost. In this regard, it is actually a commercial decision rather than a default choice. Besides, the effect of such a behavior would not be significantly enough to substantially alter a ship's CII rating, especially when the required CII keeps going down. For existing ships, the most effective methods to achieve a better CII are still speed optimization and biofouling management, as mentioned by Edwin, in the near term, including a good cooperation between port and ships, and the use of drop-in biofuels and synthetic fuels in the long run, if the policy allows so, of course, in the future. Last but not least, the short-term measures mainly aim at carbon intensity. So we actually can't expect them to achieve all the levels of ambition in the IMO GHG strategy. A basket of mid and long-term measures has been considered since the adoption of the EEXI and the CAI regulations. And the forthcoming technical and carbon pricing measures will further incentivize the uptake of alternative fuels and reduce total carbon emissions from ships. So well, that's all my response to this question. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you. And it's really interesting. You led into that piece around alternative fuels, and there's a couple of questions to pick up on that. And obviously with CIIs, this is a continuous improvement. So you do certain things and you need to keep going. So perhaps talk about that role of the alternative fuels such as methanol, and Edwin touched on that slightly, and how to help achieve that. And picking up on a question that another question we've had about the absence currently of the dependable sources of these renewable energy fuels. What steps that we need to think about in that context? And this was specifically from a ferry operator in short international trades, but more broadly about the sort of role of these new fuels.
Thank you. This is also another very important question. Regarding the effect of alternative fuels to reduce CII, that depends on how the carbon emissions of these fuels would be calculated. For the moment, there's not a clear answer in the legal text, so I can just only share my personal view on this issue. Since CII is based on tank-to-wake CO2 emissions, Edwin also emphasized that the use of carbon-free fuels, such as ammonia and hydrogen, should be counted as zero emissions, regardless of their feedstock and production pathway. However, the use of fuels that contains carbon is complicated. These fuels include biofuels and synthetic fuels made from captured carbon, such as biodiesel, biomethane, and synthetic methanol. According to the accounting principles in the IPCC guidelines, the emissions from the consumption of such fuels could be accounted as zero. But obviously, not all the policymakers at IMO would agree with this approach. And regarding the onboard carbon capture, the captured carbon should be deducted from the total CO2 emissions from ships in principle. However, how the captured carbon would be further addressed will trigger other concerns. So it appears that is an agreement on this specific issue is very difficult at this stage. And the GHG emissions factors of alternative fuels, including the consideration of CCS on board, are right under discussion in the International Correspondence Group on the LCA guidelines. And the first version of the LCA guidelines will be finalized next spring at NPC 80. But how the well-to-tank, tank-to-wake, and well-to-wake emission factors would be used are still subject to a policy decision to be made by NPC. So I think this issue is actually pending. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. And I think that goes back to Chris's point about this is an evolving process, and to increase or reduce the emissions over time, and especially given the potential long-term strategy and increasing that ambition there might have other additional impacts. Maybe Edwin, on the operational side of that, availabilities of fuel and the sort of what step-by-step guide could passenger ferries and short international trades. Are there things that one can at least look to? We can't do a full process now, but maybe some pointers in how people need to think about operating and addressing those with new fuels.
Depends on how short the journey is. So I think for the very shorter ones, there's quite a lot of experience with battery electric, whether hybrid or all battery, and I think that's growing. In the longer term, we probably want to at least wait for what these LCA guidelines look like at MEPC 80 before placing bets as to what fuels and how they're going to be considered. Supply is of course going to be a challenge, and this is a challenge for everybody. Can we get the amounts in the places that we need them? But the supply chains are slowly being built, and you can see in the news various operators teaming up with people, and all these green corridor type announcements, which I think are all about connecting the entire stakeholder chain to work together to kind of come up with that supply. So perhaps even in the short sea sector, we see some green corridors coming up, which encompasses trying to make sure that there is some quantity of the green fuel available. So if you're not in a green corridor, perhaps you want to encourage, you want to explore being in one.
Okay, thank you. That's obviously an evolving program. So we'll and I think Chris highlighted that the publication that we've produced, and our intention is to keep that as a work in progress. So we'll keep updating that. And actually, there's a question that sort of talks to port operations and onshore power supplies, and whether that is involved in the CII rating. How does that enhance or take away from that? But also, is port congestion, which can make a very big influence, calculated over 1 year? Are there intentions to have those correction factors as part of the CII calculations plan? Now, Chris, you've talked obviously a lot about that sort of role of the regulation and how it's going to evolve. Is that part of that plan, and how does that port power supply operations support, is it envisaged?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Yes, absolutely. We have a submission into MEPC 79, which highlights, in our view, that the need for a port waiting time correction factor and a short voyage correction factor. This is based on some data that we received from the Blue Sky Maritime Coalition in the United States. They were fortunate that one of their members has a fleet of sister ship tankers. 9 of the vessels are exact sister ships built in the same shipyard at the same time, to the same specification, with the same engines and operated by the same company. And they used 2019 data to calculate CII. And for the sister ships, the ratings varied from B to E. Now, the reasons that this occurred were, firstly, the vessels were on routes of different length. So, of course, the vessels on short routes incurred poor CII ratings, but also port waiting time was a critical factor as well. Some vessels incurred more time at anchor than other vessels, and of course, time at anchor, there's no distance traveled, but you're still burning fuel, so that significantly affects the CII rating. So, yeah, this is an issue close to our heart and other industry trade associations as well. So we're continuing to advocate for the addition of correction factors, appropriate correction factors on those issues. In terms of shore power, I would certainly be interested to hear Edwin and Professor Zhang's view, but if you're receiving shore power, I would see that as beneficial to your CII rating. It stops you using auxiliary generators when in port, so it's reducing your fuel consumption. So I would say it would be beneficial to the CII rating.
Okay, Professor Yang, do you want to add to anything on that? Nope. Okay, got it covered. Edwin?
Yeah, and I agree with Chris. So if you have shore power, it's definitely going to reduce the amount of fuel you use from the generators while you're in port. But something we just need to be very clear about. So if you call 2, 3, 4 ports in a year and you manage to get shore power in all of them, that's fantastic, because that's going to be all of your port stays will be covered by shore power. If you go to 50 ports in a year and you only manage to get shore power in 4 of them, you may not actually see a huge difference in your CII. So you've got to look at your operational profile and what the ports are kind of doing. And you're all very good at making those investment decisions and the cost benefit analysis. But it really is important to sort of figure out what you're going to get at what point. And maybe in all 50 of the ports that you call out, there's a plan over the next 6-8 years, also with FuelEU Maritime coming into place, that they're all going to have shore power. Great. but you've got to evaluate it based on your operating profile now, but also think in the future what you might use your vessel for. Those things you absolutely need to look at. So it helps, but it's operational profile dependent.
Thank you. There's a sort of lot. We're getting loads of questions, which is great. And Edwin, you touched on digitization a little bit earlier, and sort of how the reliability of marine digitization strategies reduce the dependency on crews. And you know, we hear a lot about autonomous ships and this sort of thing. And you know, I think it's that bridge between the type of information and the rubbish in, rubbish out kind of thing, and how people need to address that. Perhaps you can just expand a little bit more on where people need to focus their attention, maybe a practical tip.
I think you've got to approach any digitalization project with your crew. To implement this properly, the crew need to act on what the digital system is telling them. So, but it starts from, if you're going to go down digitalization route, you need to first make sure that your sensors are giving you the right information, because very often they're not. And you've got to have a calibration and maintenance plan in place for sensors. You can't just assume that they work, once they're fitted, they work flawlessly forever, because sensors drift, and a lot of the sensors we have probably in this earlier adoption phase, probably land-based sensors not been properly marinized. The ship is not a very benign place for electronics. It vibrates. It's corrosive. And so all of those things you need to take into account. It's not fit and forget. You need to keep on top of making sure your sensors are giving you the right data. And crew training is important. Actually, the crew being trained to accept and act on the outputs and the outcomes of the digital system is equally important as the digital system. So very often from experience, we see digital projects not go quite as intended, just because we haven't sort of done it holistically.
Thank you. I think that's really interesting, that interface between, it's not just the technology, it's the people as well, and making sure that the system, it's quite important to think about that in a holistic process. And your point earlier about this, the impact of this breaking down the sort of silos within organizations is quite interesting as a sort of byproduct, and probably useful going forward. We're coming towards the end, and I'm going to now sort of, we've still got lots of questions, and what we'll try and do is get back to people with these at the end. So we're running out of our time. But what I want to try and just do is ask our panel, while we have them, sort of the 3 key points, the takeaways that you would think our audience need to be focused on, need to think about as they then take from here and think about this, because it's coming in on the 1st of January or the 31st of December, depending on the 2 different regulations and going on, obviously, and evolving. Professor Shanks, can I start with you? It's always easier to be the first one, because someone else doesn't feel your thoughts, so I'll leave you to first go.
Thinking I'd love to. Regarding the 3 key points, so firstly, even though EEXI and CII are short-term measures, the industry should avoid a short-sighted strategy for compliance, because the mid and long-term measures are right on the way. Secondly, charters and cargo owners and all the other players in the marine value chain are strongly advised not to over-rely on CII when picking the carriers and steering investment, because a D&E rating does not necessarily indicate a poorly operated ship in exceptional cases. Third one, keep an eye on LCA guidelines, because they will have significant implications for both short-term measures and mid and long-term measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Edwin, pick up on that and give you the chance to add to your 3 points, or maybe duplicate.
Thanks, Stuart. CII is entering a phase of probably what we want to call growing pains. So there's going to be there will be some challenges. What's important is to let us know, let ICS and let the regulators know about where it doesn't work or where you're going to struggle, so that we can together design a better system at the review. So if you have a problem, don't hide it. Talk about it. You talk to your flag state, because there's the compliance issue, and to your RO. Tell ICS, tell the regulators, and that will be your contribution to making a better system, in the future. That's one. Second, I think, is with CII particularly, look at your operations first, understand what your operational profile does to your CII, and monitor. That would be the third point. You want to keep on top of monitoring what's happening, and you may want to share that information to other stakeholders, to the port, to your charterer, to unlock some further efficiencies.
That's two. What was your third one?
Was it two?
Oh, well, don't worry.
Operational stuff. Operations was the other.
Yeah.
Monitoring. Yeah.
Cool. And last but not least, Chris.
Some great points from Professor Zhang and Edwin. I agreed with all of those. Yeah, my 3 points. Firstly, with the coming into force of EEXI, CII, and SEMP Part 3, IMO's package of short-term greenhouse gas measures is now complete. It's in place. The train's leaving the station. The compliance deadline for SEMP Part 3 is 31st of December 2022. Depending on the timing of a vessel's IAPP survey, the deadline for EEXI compliance may also be very tight. As we say, ICS members have advised that bottlenecks are appearing. Hence, we urge ship owners to give these mandatory aspects of the short-term measures their earliest attention, if not already done so. From 1st of January 2023, the CII system enters a 3-year review period with soft enforcement. ICS will continue to engage constructively with MEPC during this period to highlight any system weaknesses and to contribute proposals for system improvements. IMO's review of the system must complete by 1st of January 2026. As we mentioned in the presentations, part of the terms of reference for the review that IMO will undertake includes enforcement. They will look again at enforcement by no later than January 2026. It's possible that the level of enforcement may change at that point for CII. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Chris. And I think that's an interesting point, because this is part of a journey now, as I sort of alluded to at the beginning. This is the short-term measures, and we go on, and I know there's conversations and discussions in medium term and a revision of the strategy. So, and I'm just back from the COP conversation in Sharm el Sheikh last night, and the practicalities of these things are evolving through, and I think the IMO is getting to grips with that and moving that on, and hopefully if those ship owners and operators out there provide that feedback, as Edwin said, we can make sure that we craft something that delivers for international trade. And I know there was concerns in the chat about impacts on trade, but also reduces emissions, and then we can hopefully come to a win-win both for the planet and keeping everyone fed and operating. So thank you for my panel. It's been great. There's an awful lot of information that we've bombarded, and I know from the media and from everyone else there's a lot of interest, concern. It's a change in operation, and we talk about slow steaming. I think shipping is speeding up in terms of regulation and having to grips with our operational changes. So hopefully the publication which Chris talked about will help. It's built in such a way to provide some practical solutions and hopefully easy to read, and again, provide feedback to us if it's not providing what you need as well, because that's an iterative process, and we're hoping to move that on. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to thank my panel for their time. Thank you also for watching, listening. As I said earlier, it's been recorded, and you'll get a copy of this shortly. I will send you out an email, and obviously keep watching, and we'll keep people updated as much as we can within the ICS community. So thank you very much indeed for your attention.